Joining me now, Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, thank you as always. Let's start with these ISIS families. The Albanese government hell-bent on bringing them back from Syria. 16 women at this stage, 42 children. We've seen a drip of these stories in the media about the return of them. Today, the story about them being DNA tested. But we haven't got anything official from the Prime Minister. Now, surely that's the least Australians deserve, given he barely mentioned these plans on the other side of the election. And of course, they'll live in suburbs in Melbourne and Sydney.
This news came out through Ellen Winnett and The Australian and others from the families themselves and charities in that particular space. And the government wanted to keep it all pretty quiet until they came back, indeed, even once they had come back. Because there'll be controversy over what resources, for a start, it will take in terms of surveillance and the like to make sure that these people aren't a terrorist threat or a threat to radicalism in Australia.
Millions and millions of dollars.
It's a controversial move. It's a controversial move, and it's very much, it seems to me, an ideological move. And I thought Peter Dutton handled it pretty sensibly in the sense that he waited for his briefing first, despite the fact he knew a lot about the circumstances and the cases from his time as Home Affairs Minister, but he waited for that briefing before coming out publicly and coming to the conclusion that he would prefer if they weren't brought home.
And I made the point in some articles I've written, and I've said it here on the program, it's literally millions and millions of dollars to have 24/7 coverage of anyone in the terrorist space. We've got a few of them out already, coming out from Australian prisons, add these women in. And I just don't think there's a support for it in the Australian community. Let's go to this Medicare story. I mean, I tell you what, $150 billion, we're told, could have been fraudulently siphoned off out of the system. I know we put medicos up on a pedestal, particularly after the pandemic, but this has got to be dealt with, doesn't it? What's the government's next move?
Well, I've spoken to people in the current government and the former government, and they think this story is an exaggeration. And it's not to say there isn't a problem. I agree with you that it should be addressed. It seems to me there's not enough policing. And it's been put to me, Labor often opposed the former government trying to put in more in the way of compliance because it allowed them to politically say again that the coalition government was attacking Medicare. But if anything, these reports, if they can lead to more compliance, less complicated and less Medicare items, that would be a good thing. 30% is way over the top. It's basically come from one PhD person. It implies that 30% of doctors in Australia are involved in fraud. I don't believe that. But is there potentially fraud and wastage around 5 or 10%, which is still in the billions? Absolutely. So even that report from the 9 newspapers, Peter, said the Auditor General had found up to $2.2 billion was being wasted or rorted. That report, I actually looked at it, it said 366 million to 2.2 billion, and that was only based on international examples. So it was hardly the best study of things. But I think, if anything, at least we've been able to see that there are ways to cut Medicare without making more deleterious the care of patients. There seems a lot of inefficiencies there. There does seem some fraud there. And this shouldn't be some magic thing the government can't touch. They say the budget's in dire straits. They need to be looking at cuts, and they shouldn't be quarantining areas in the manner that they've indicated they will, at least for the October budget.
Well, just on that point, let's go to the NDIS. Today, the Minister responsible, Bill Shorten, he's had to reveal the scheme's going to cost taxpayers another $8.8 billion over the forward estimates. Here was Bill Shorten.
And the other problem that the coalition government's left us with is that we will see, even between the March budget of this year and the budget which Treasurer Chalmers will bring down next week, an increase in the NDIS projected costs over the next 4 years of $8.8 billion across the next 4 years from the budget numbers that the coalition government provided the nation in March. This is very poor management of the scheme by the outgoing government.
Now, you better be careful there when he said, you know, this is what the coalition left us with, because he was Julia Gillard's junior minister when this thing was set up. I was there at the time. And a lot of the architectural issues that are causing these blowouts in the NDIS come from how it was established by Julia Gillard and by Bill Shorten. A lot of goodwill here, Andrew, but we can't cop a program headed towards $60 billion a year.
He put out a press release announcing a review into the scheme by the former chair of the scheme and the former Education Department Secretary. And it wasn't until the 21st paragraph of that press release. He says, oh, by the way, it's blown out by $8.8 billion. To give viewers an idea, there is not one election commitment from the Albanese government which is of that volume. The biggest, I think, was childcare, $5.4 billion over the forward estimates, which is the first 4 years of the government. This is 8.8 in terms of a blowout.
I've got to get your take on political novice, new ACT Senator David Pocock. He wants the Albanese government to forgive around $100 million of public housing debt that the ACT owes federal taxpayers. And the quid pro quo is that if he gets that money abolished out of the ACTU, he says he'll vote for the abolition of the Building and Construction Watchdog, the ABCC. Now, I think horse trading like this is out of line, but why on earth should all Australians cop the budget mess in the ACTU? Why forgive the debt?
Yes, and I don't know if it sends the best message to his voters. I mean, these independents have come in talking about integrity and the rest, and yet, as you say, he's looking to horse trade. So it's not a great look for him. A very interesting revelation on that today. And the government's setting themselves a challenge, aren't they? They're putting out this hard budget and they're going to go for IR reform, it seems, at exactly the same time, and they're going for federal ICAC legislation at exactly the same time. It's a very busy end to the year, and of course the Greens and David Pocock's votes are crucial. He must think he has the government over a barrel, but Katie Gallagher has indicated she won't be bending to this one, but will she and Andrew Barr come to some agreement on this debt anyway? That's what we need to watch out for. But I agree with you, for someone who's putting themselves out there on this bastion of integrity, on new politics, it's not the best look.
I don't think taxpayers anywhere other than the ACTU should pay for this sort of red ink. Andrew Clennell, thank you.
Thanks, Peter.